I know Villisca's a big deal. I know Lizzie Borden's a big deal, but the people have spoken, so we're gonna go to the Midwest. Well, hey weirdos, welcome back to the channel. I'm Amy, one half of Full Dark Paranormal Explorers, where we talk about all things weird and strange and also deadly. Today, I'm taking you to Kansas. I know, Kansas. Hold on to your butts. This one starts a whole series of weirdness that's coming up. This is the story of another unsolved crime of the most heinous kind from the early 1900s that takes place in a little town called Ellsworth, Kansas. The Showman family were not a family of great means, but they were a good family. The Showman family consisted of William and his wife Pauline, both in their early 30s, Lester, who was 5 years old, daughter Fern, a year old, and baby Fenton. Not even a year old. So let's go back, October 1911. This murder happened over the course of a very short period of time. The house was only 2 rooms, divided by one wall with a door somewhere in between it, and only oil lamps for lighting. The way the house was set up was both beds for the parents and the kids were in the front room as you came in, entering from a side door on the shorter side of the house. This murder is significant because it took place similar to those that we are going to talk about and that you're probably very familiar with. This family was bludgeoned to death with an axe. I know, another axe murder in the Midwest. The early 1900s have a string of unsolved murders, and I've always found them fascinating, and I've heard for years theories have connected all of them with a single serial killer. Is it true? We don't know. But here we are again in a small town with a house full of a family, feet from the railroad tracks. This is going to be significant in every Midwest unsolved crime we talk about. How close these families lived to the railroad tracks. Rail travel was the means of travel long distance in America. No one was renting a Toyota Corolla to cross the plains. No. And where was the Showman family home? On the outskirts of town, feet from the railroad tracks. If we're looking at the modus operandi of who could have done this horrendous murder and who might have perpetrated more crimes like this across these states, Occam's razor, the railroad. So how did this murder happen? How was it discovered? And how has a murder this heinous gone unsolved for over a century? It was a woman named Lori Snook, a neighbor who lived 2 blocks from the Showman family, who, after seeing them last at 9 p.m. at night, Sunday night when they were visiting her house and all walked back to theirs, decided to call on them. After not receiving an answer via telephone, several repeated tries, she went over to the house, knocked on the door, received still no answer, and entered that front room to find the crime scene. It was exactly as you imagine. You can't use an axe and not leave behind very obvious evidence of the crime. And before you ask, yeah, the house is gone. It's been torn down sometime before 1918, and no one lived in that house after the murders took place. So the friend of the family, Lori Snook, had come over, found the bodies, immediately went to the brother's house of William Showman, and had to break the news. They then called the authorities and investigated the crime. Now, weird thing about the crime scene, there was a telephone in the home, and the killer had placed one of Pauline's dresses over the telephone. If we're going to compare it to other crimes of the time and the practice of covering mirrors in mourning, maybe there weren't a lot of mirrors in the place, and that was the only thing the person thought to cover. It's very odd. There was one oil lamp that was situated between the 2 rooms on like a swing arm, allowing for light to go into one or both rooms at a time, and that was taken off of its stand by the killer. And the cover, the glass case, was found either under a chair, under a bed, but somewhere else. And the killer had placed the lantern at the foot of Pauline and Will's bed to burn out when he was done. Because of where the lamp was found on the floor without its case over it, it seemed like the killer wanted to commit this crime in dim light so that they didn't wake up, and the kids didn't wake up before he could get through his grim task. It seemed as though Mr. Showman was not awake when the crime happened, but the wife might have sat up. As far as the children, we don't know. They were all unrecognizable. And of course, most importantly, the weapon, the axe, seemingly wiped off by a brag found also in the home with a bucket of water that the killer had probably used to clean it, was found behind the door that went between the two rooms of the home, leaning against the wall, casually. This seems to be a hallmark of so many of these Midwest murders. Axes were readily available, readily in use, and something that would absolutely be found at almost every home. Easiest thing to grab, leaving a weapon on the side of a person's house at every house. That's something to bring in the house and lock down before going to bed. So again, one of these weird things where somebody seemed to probably have come off the railroad tracks, committed this crime, and then been able to slip away really easily. Now, there were suspects, and there's one guy in particular that the person was tried for and then acquitted for, and this man's name was John Marcic. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce this name, but I have Google and I do my best. Now, sadly, Lori Snook, the Showman family friend, had not found that family until 6 p.m. the next evening, that Monday afternoon into the evening. So by that time, whoever perpetrated this murder had a chance to be very, very long gone from Ellsworth, Kansas. Now, the Showman family actually owned a dog, and that dog was sitting in the middle of the room laying down when they were discovered. So it seems as though the person who committed those murders might have had some sort of familiarity with the dog, for that dog to have not woken up or reacted in any way when this person showed up. That's just one theory, because if this person was completely random and had maybe cased the house, it would have taken, I don't know, longer than one time for this dog to get used to this stranger. Kind of a weak theory, but also really strange the way the dog didn't react and didn't seem to wake up the family. Now, this John Marcic man was the ex-husband of Pauline Showman's sister. He had gotten divorced and remarried, and there might have been some bad blood between the families, which could have led that man to commit this crime against his sister-in-law's entire family. He was arrested, tried, convicted, and then acquitted because his alibi ended up being way too tight. This is also a character in history who has been looked at extensively for many of the other crimes that were similar to this one in the Midwest at the time. Now, we know forensics at the time this took place. I'm not drinking an empty cup, I promise. Forensics at the time were lacking. We didn't have the technology, but we did have bloodhounds, and bloodhounds were used, sent from a larger city in the area to track this murderer, and every time the dogs tried, they went to the railroad and the scent stopped. Another strange thing, a bloody work shirt was found in what was called the Baker Hotel, and it was in a room occupied by a stranger for several hours Sunday night, and that person was never seen again. I don't know, bloody work shirt, stranger in a hotel, the dogs lose the scent at the railroad tracks. I'm not an investigator in no way. I don't even do the hunt a killer thing, which I mean, it looks fun. I've never tried it. But I think I have to Occam's razor that one. At the time, it might seem a little early, but fingerprint technology was as advanced as it is today, with human eyes looking at the fingerprints to compare and see if they're the same. And some fingerprints were taken and compared to those of Marcic, the ex-in-law who was connected to the crime, who was a suspect at the time. Didn't match. I'd like to say it's Charles Marcic. I'm not going to say it right, and I feel bad for that, so someone else can help. Now, by the end of that month, October, when the murders happened, the outlook for finding a suspect was extremely grim, and sure enough, it panned out that nobody was found. Several other men were taken in and held as suspects, with fingerprint comparisons found, and nothing matched up. The person or persons who murdered the entire 5-person Showman family in October 1911 in Ellsworth, Kansas, was just gone. Now, before we had the FBI, we had what was called the Pinkerton Force, and these were the early detectives. They started in the 1800s, and it's a private detective company, and they do still actually exist, which I think is really interesting, but they were kind of like the pre-runner to our bigger investigation services, and even that force of detectives could not figure out who killed this family. You know, that's less than 1 year before what's coming up next, the Villisca Axe murders. Is it the same person, using the railway system to travel between towns, targeting different families in particular houses with something convenient in order to commit his gruesome crimes? Was it just that there was an axe, he found it, he could canvass the place and then leave unsuspecting? We don't know. But this is just one of the many, disturbingly many true crime stories I'm going to be telling you from the early 1900s in the Midwest and Western United States. You know what sucks about all of these murders? All of this technology exists to talk about and spread awareness, but we're over a century past when these murders took place, and anyone with that working memory of those times and places are gone. It's just a perpetual injustice. So, hey, if you find a journal in an attic with some confession, do turn that in. Many of the families involved in these early 1900s cases have relatives and descendants and other distant members of family that are out there. They'd probably also like to have this figured out. And there you have episode 2 of Full Dark Unsolved. I'm glad you were here for it, as fully dark as it can get. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a comment down below, hit subscribe, hit the thumbs up button, and you know the drill. Stay alive. Don't try to hide in the attic. It's just, when has that ever worked out?